Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. You know, we always love to tackle the really big questions here, and this one might be one of the biggest.
Oh, absolutely.
We are diving into this concept of mass delusion.
Collective psychosis.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like sometimes called.
So it's this idea that big chunks of society can kind of lose touch with a shared sense of what's actually real.
Yeah.
And the sources for this one.
Yeah, you really brought some intense stuff.
Really intense, really fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not just like people having different opinions. It's like something much deeper.
Right. Yeah, it's really about how these perceptions can actually shift.
Yeah.
On a mass scale.
Yeah.
And how these mechanics behind that might actually work.
And so the sources are suggesting we really need to look at how these mass delusions could take hold in the really influential parts of society.
Oh, yeah.
So we're talking the news,
absolutely,
social media, universities, and even government and the judicial system.
Yeah, especially when you start to consider those appointed positions.
Right.
The concern there is that these viewpoints can become so ingrained.
Yeah, and the potential consequences.
They're huge.
They're massive.
Yeah.
And so we see increased division, the silencing of other opinions, and then this decline in being able to think clearly and rationally.
Yes.
And then even our sense of what is right and wrong really starts to shift.
Really gets distorted.
It's really fundamental stuff.
It is foundational stuff.
So for this deep dive, you and I, we're going to try to really extract what are the key ideas from your sources.
Right.
To try to understand how this dynamic of mass delusion works.
Right.
And how it could impact all of us.
Yeah, and what the impacts could be.
So.
Okay, so.
Why don't we start with the big kahuna, Carl Jung.
Yes, Carl Jung offers us such a good starting point here.
Yeah.
So he actually talked about this, what he called epidemic of madness.
Oh, wow.
That can really inflict huge harm on societies.
Yeah.
What's so interesting about his perspectives, he talks about where it begins.
Right.
He theorized that it usually starts with an individual's emotional instability.
Okay.
Which then spreads through fear and anxiety.
Oh, wow.
In the population, almost like a contagion.
Oh, like a psychological?
A psychological contagion. Yeah. So widespread anxieties can really be fertile ground for irrational beliefs to spread.
And so Jung wasn't just theorizing in the abstract.
Oh, he wasn't.
He pointed to very specific examples like the Salem witch trials.
Right.
Which I find so fascinating.
Right.
And of course, we've seen the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. And so this wasn't just isolated madness.
Yeah.
This was this collective, almost contagious spread of these beliefs.
It's interesting, too, when you start to consider his idea of the collective unconscious. Yeah. Which is this kind of shared attic of humanity.
Yeah.
We have all these fears and symbols and experiences that are just sort of dormant.
Right.
Until something triggers them.
Yeah, and then boom.
And then it can lead to this widespread irrationality.
Yeah.
So you have societal fears that get activated.
Yeah.
And that can fuel these collective delusions and give them this really powerful presence.
Yeah, it's like they find a target.
Right.
And then it's boom.
Yeah.
The irrationality just clusters.
It stirs around it.
Around that target.
Yeah.
And so Jung warned that societies that weren't self-aware were much more susceptible to these psychic epidemics.
Psychic epidemics.
And you see this echo in the modern world. So we see these very strong ideological beliefs that people adhere to.
Yeah.
Almost like a religion.
Almost like a religion.
Offering certainty.
Right.
Belonging.
Yeah.
But maybe not always on solid logical ground.
Not always. No.
Okay, so we have this framework from Jung.
Right.
Of how societies can kind of lose their way.
Lose their way,
And then your sources also bring in this psychological dimension.
Right.
This is where it gets super interesting.
It does.
It's this potential role of borderline personality disorder.
Borderline personality disorder, yes.
BPD.
BPD.
And so this is where it gets really thought-provoking.
It does.
And maybe a little challenging.
Yes, it brings up some challenging questions.
So your sources explore how these certain personality traits, particularly the ones that are known for emotional dysregulation and distorted perceptions of reality.
Yeah, so the inability to regulate emotions and that really distorted sense of what's real.
Yeah.
So those are sometimes seen in BPD.
Right.
But the important thing to note here is we are not diagnosing entire groups of people.
Right. This is not about labeling.
No.
This is about understanding the dynamics
exactly
that could be at play.
Right.
At a societal level.
So the sources point to very specific traits.
Yes, they do.
One of them is splitting.
Splitting, yeah.
So it's this black and white thinking.
Right. So you're either all good.
Yeah.
Or all bad.
Yeah, good or bad.
There's no in between.
There's no nuance.
No nuance.
And then paranoia.
Paranoia, yeah.
So this sense of distrust.
Right, this pervasive distrust.
And the sources suggest that these very rigid, suspicious thought patterns could contribute to delusional beliefs forming and spreading.
Yeah. And then they go on to explore how this might actually manifest.
In different institutions.
So let's start with the media and social media.
Sure. So the argument is that, you know, these really emotionally charged narratives that are often presented in a very simplified way gain a lot of traction. And that's because they might resonate with those underlying patterns of black and white thinking and suspicion. So the real insight there is that that black and white thinking is maybe a driver of the polarization that we see.
So there's no nuance.
No.
It's either you're with us or against us.
Right. You're all good or all bad.
And you're either totally right or totally wrong.
Exactly.
And it makes sense in a way.
It does.
Because outrage and fear are so engaging online.
They are addictive even.
Yeah, they're addictive.
Yeah.
They really grab you.
Yeah.
So what about universities?
Yeah. So in the universities, the source suggests that emotionally driven perspective could become really dominant in the discourse.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a sort of ideological conformity. So if you have individuals with these very intense emotional responses and this black and white worldview, they gain influence and then create an environment where different viewpoints aren't just debated, they're suppressed.
Right. They're seen as
morally wrong.
Yeah, almost dangerous.
Dangerous even,
But I mean, universities are supposed to be about
I know, right?
Academic freedom.
Yeah, academic freedom.
So how do these emotionally driven perspectives actually become dominant?
Right.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a crucial question.
And then there's the judicial system.
Yes, judicial system.
Which is incredibly sensitive.
It is.
Particularly appointed judges.
Yeah, particularly appointed positions.
And so the concern is that people with really strong ideological biases, fueled by these very rigid beliefs, could end up in these positions of power.
Yeah.
And their beliefs essentially become the law.
Become codified into law.
Through their ruling.
Through their rulings, yeah.
So that's a huge...
That's a huge concern.
Concern for the impartiality.
The impartiality
of the entire system,
And your sources point to echo chambers.
Echo chambers, yes.
As a key mechanism here.
Correct.
So the idea is that these institutions, media outlets, university departments, government agencies, they might hire people... who share very similar viewpoints.
Very similar viewpoints.
And so it creates this self-reinforcing cycle.
Yeah, a self-reinforcing cycle where those perspectives are constantly validated.
Validated and amplified.
And other views are either marginalized or excluded.
Yeah, they're pushed out.
And so you get this amplified groupthink.
Yes, amplified groupthink.
Where the internal logic, no matter how flawed it might be.
Yeah, no matter how flawed.
It just goes unchallenged.
Yeah, even challenged.
Okay, and then your sources bring in the work of Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
And his book, The Righteous Mind.
Right.
And so how does this perspective on morality and tribalism connect to this idea of mass delusion?
So Haidt provides such a crucial layer to understanding why these delusions are so sticky and so powerful.
Okay.
So he's essentially arguing that our moral compass isn't really about careful reasoning. It's more about gut feelings and, what binds our team together.
Right. So it's about belonging.
Belonging it is.
And he says morality isn't about individual rational deliberation.
Yeah.
It's rooted in our social nature.
It is, yeah.
And it functions to build group unity.
Group unity, exactly.
And so he talks about humans being naturally tribal.
Tribal, yeah.
And so our default setting is to prioritize the needs of the group.
Yes.
Sometimes even above objective facts.
Yes, above objective truth.
Or rational analysis.
Or rational analysis.
And so this drive to belong can blind us.
Absolutely can blind us.
To objective truth.
Yes.
And make us susceptible to these
shared delusions.
Shared delusions that reinforce that group identity.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, too, because the sources point out the evolutionary advantage of this.
Right, because if you think about it from a survival perspective.
A group that can act together.
Right.
Even if their beliefs are wrong.
Even if they're wrong.
Is more likely to survive.
You'll be more successful.
Than a group that's divided.
We can't agree on anything.
So in a way, these mass delusions can serve a function.
Yeah.
By creating this really strong shared identity.
A shared sense of identity and purpose. Yeah.
Within a group.
Within a group.
Even if it's not, even if it's
based on reality.
On reality.
Yeah. It's unsettling, but it's an insight.
And the sources suggest that mass delusions can redefine morality.
Yes.
So those who adhere to the delusion are seen as virtuous.
They're the in-group.
Yeah. And those who don't are seen as...
They're the outsiders. They're the bad guys.
Immoral.
They're the enemy, even.
The enemy, wow.
Yeah.
And that explains why these fights become so heated.
So heated and so personal.
So personal.
Yeah.
It's not just that I disagree with your policy.
It's not just a policy disagreement.
Yes.
You are
evil. You represent evil.
You represent evil.
Wow. And your sources highlight how these ideologies can strengthen those in-group bonds.
Right.
But at the same time, lead to the demonization of the outgroup.
Of those who disagree.
Yeah.
And so the example that the sources give is political ideologies.
Yeah, political ideologies becoming moral musts.
Right. So it's not just that.
Right.
You have a different political belief.
Yeah.
You're a bad person.
You're a morally bad person.
It's
not okay to even think like that.
Wow. And this really has huge implications.
Huge implications.
For democracy.
Which
is supposed to be about compromise.
Compromise and dialogue.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about Jung.
Yeah.
We've talked about these potential psychological factors.
Yes.
Now we see how our tribal instincts play into this.
Yeah, our human nature.
Yeah, our human nature. The sources also bring in Jung's idea.
Yes.
Of the religious creature.
Yeah.
So tell me about this.
Okay, so Jung theorized that humans have this inherent religious nature.
Okay.
And we have this need for meaning and purpose and belonging that's historically been fulfilled by religions.
Right.
But what your sources point out is that secular ideologies can function a lot like religions.
Wow. So they're framing protests as rituals and influential articles.
As sacred texts. Yeah.
It's such an interesting way to look at it.
It is. It's reframing the way we're understanding this.
What are some other examples of these rituals you see in action?
Oh, well, so you think about like online slacktivism,
Right.
That's a ritual in a way.
Yeah.
Or these big gatherings for certain ideologies or causes.
It's like a pilgrimage.
It is. It's like a pilgrimage. Yeah.
Okay.
So these
secular ideologies develop their own rituals.
Right.
Their own sacred texts.
They're
key thinkers.
Yeah. Influential thinkers or manifestos.
Right.
And they have their own heretics.
Right. Those who don't agree.
Yeah.
And so your sources connect this to that evolutionary perspective.
Right. So historically religions were this very powerful test of trust.
Within a group.
Right. So by adhering, you are signaling.
You're signaling. I'm one of you.
You're one of us.
I'm loyal.
Yes.
You can trust me.
And we can trust you.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so the sources suggest that this intense defense of even seemingly irrational beliefs could be stemming from this need to belong.
This need to belong.
And signal, I'm loyal.
Loyalty, yeah.
I'm one of you.
Yeah, I'm part of the group.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
And so even if the belief itself isn't based in evidence,
right,
the act of defending it is a way of saying,
right,
I'm trustworthy.
I'm with you.
Right.
We're on the same team.
So it solidifies the group.
Yeah.
Even if it's at the expense of rational thought.
At the expense of truth and logic, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
So we've explored these roots of mass delusion.
The potential mechanisms, yeah.
What about the consequences?
The broader societal consequences?
For society.
Yeah.
And it sounds like these aren't small.
No, they're not small.
They're not trivial.
Oh, they're not trivial.
So the sources paint a picture of these significant negative impacts.
Right. So that human need for belonging and for belief, when it's hijacked by ideologies, can have these really significant negative consequences.
And the most obvious one is division.
Division and polarization. Yeah.
And so these ideological divides become so deep.
Deeper and more entrenched.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, as we talked about before, this leads to the suppression of different opinions.
Dissenting opinions.
Whether it's through censorship.
Right, outright censorship.
Maybe more subtle forms.
Yeah. Forms of collusion.
And shaming.
Shaming and social pressure.
Shaming and social pressure. Yeah. And so if you don't subscribe to that prevailing delusion, you're out.
You're ostracized. You're out. Yeah.
And that stifles.
It does. It really stifles.
Healthy debate.
Yeah.
Critical thinking.
It does.
And so instead of rational, evidence-based discussion, you get emotional appeals.
Yeah.
And the reinforcement of bias.
The persisting bias.
And ultimately the sources argued this leads to a shift in what's right and wrong.
Our sense of morality,
that's not based on objective principles, but on the delusion. And the consequences
they're not abstract.
Just abstract.
No.
So we're talking democratic government.
Yes.
Economic well-being.
Right.
Social harmony.
All very real, tangible things.
Yeah, when you can't agree on reality.
It's really hard.
It is hard.
To solve problems together.
It is.
Okay.
And so looking ahead, your sources offer some speculations on future impacts.
So what are some of these potential future consequences?
One is this erosion of trust in law and government.
Right.
If there's a perception that the judicial system is biased.
Right.
So if people believe that laws are enforced based on beliefs rather than on objective principles.
Yeah, objective principles.
That undermines...
Yeah, it undermines the whole system.
The whole system.
Yeah.
Wow. And that could lead to... real instability.
Instability and breakdown.
Yeah, breakdown.
Of social order.
Of order.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else?
Okay, well, the source also talks about this possibility of moving toward more authoritarianism.
Wow.
So when you have these groups that are locked in this ideological conflict, there's a risk that one group will try to impose its beliefs by force. Yeah. And that undermines democracy and individual freedoms.
Wow. And then the economic implications.
No, economic implications are huge.
They're huge.
Yeah.
Because if policies are driven by irrational beliefs, that can really harm.
It can really harm.
Prosperity.
Prosperity and innovation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so irrational decision-making on a societal level can have these really tangible economic consequences.
Yes, very real economic consequences.
And then finally, the sources point to this potential for increased conflict.
Right.
And a real difficulty in finding common ground.
And that just